Games Corner is a unique console-based gaming experience with 3D and LED screens, all within a comfortable atmosphere. Become a Games Corner franchisee now and bring this one-of-a-kind opportunity to your location. For more information, visit us at gamescorner.com.
Hi everyone, this is Ahmed Karimli and welcome to Be Efficient TV. The mission of this web TV show is to boost the efficiency of your business and life through tips and tricks from leading experts. And today I have with me Jessica Kay. She's the founder of Big Happy Family, an audiobook distribution company, a former president of the Audio Publishers Association, and a Grammy Awards winning audiobooks producer with more than 500 audio titles to her credits. She's also a lawyer specialized in entertainment law. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what's your background and how did you start in the audio world after, practicing law?
I came to it actually in two different ways. First, when I was young, I had always wanted to be in the record business. I loved music from the time I was a child. And so when I moved to Los Angeles, I took a class at UCLA Extension, which it's part of UCLA, but it's not for credit. You're not, working on a degree. And the class was in record production. And the record producer who taught the class, a wonderful guy named Nick Vinay, who sadly is no longer with us, was really excited about spoken word. And he kept telling the class, "You've got to get on this. This is the big thing. It's coming around the corner, guys. You've got to pay attention." Which was interesting because he was a music producer, successful one. So one of the other girls in the class and I started trying to put together a spoken word project. There was I think she was I was going to say a local celebrity, but I think she was a national spokesperson at the time for this MSG editive called Accent. And we wanted to do a cookbook with her, and we wanted to do it on audio. And she had a big personality, and it would have been fun. We never got past the contract stages, as sometimes happens. So I did not earn experience in actually producing an audiobook at that time, but I did learn a little bit about negotiating for one. And then a few years later, I was asked to become house counsel, vice president of business affairs for a local small entertainment company that made TV movies and occasionally a feature film. They also published audiobooks. And it was a very small company. I think maybe there were 6 of us working there, maybe 7, 8 once in a while. So I learned everything. It was very hands-on. And after a few years there, I started my own audiobook publishing company. I should add that along with my love of music, I've also always loved books and literature. And audiobooks are the perfect marriage of those two things. You get to work with books and you get to work with the recorded arts. So I guess I was pretty fortunate.
Since when you think the audiobooks era started?
Long before I was associated with it. There were, I think maybe, I could be totally wrong. There was a company called Cadmon, Caedmon, that started, I want to say, in the 50s. And it had spoken word recordings of famous authors reading their own works, I think like T.S. Eliot, maybe. I don't have more examples to offer. I'm sorry, I can't recall. But around the mid-'80s, maybe, it became a commercially more visible part of the publishing community. So most of the major publishers had added audiobook departments at that time, and a few small, they weren't all small, a few independent publishers had also popped up. And I would say from the mid to late 80s onward is when it started steamrolling into major growth.
You were a member of Audio Publishers Association. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, the Audio Publishers Association was formed, I believe, sometime also in the mid to late 80s as a way for those in the industry to gather together to use their forces, their resources, to heighten awareness of audiobooks. Back then, if you worked in audiobooks, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, if you said to somebody, "I work with audiobooks," they would say, first they'd say, "What is that?" And then when you explained what it was, they would say, "Oh, you mean for the blind?" So even though there was already a commercial market for it, many people had still never heard of it. So that was probably part of the impetus for the Audio Publishers Association, and it remains today. It's a much bigger organization today than it was back then when it had 6 or 8, maybe a dozen members. And it still is out there promoting audiobooks as a genre, as an industry.
What's your current focus?
What do you mean?
Like in terms of Happy Big Family and the other companies, kmills.com that you have, what are the services that you provide?
I see. Thank you. Okay, so K and Mills is a law firm. I work with the partner, Kevin Mills, and he does primarily entertainment law. He works as production counsel quite a bit on feature films, mostly independent feature films. So the budgets are all over the place, from teeny tiny films to significantly multi-million dollar films. We both also do business transactional work. So if somebody wants to form a company, we can help them with that. If they have contracts, we can negotiate or interpret, depending on, what area of law the contracts are in. And then I also have a focus in publishing, since I spend so much time in audio publishing, and also the company that I mentioned, the entertainment company that I worked with, also did some book publishing, and I've done some. And I've represented, and I still represent, a number of authors, and occasionally a publishing company or a small distribution company, that sort of thing. So I do quite a bit. Most of my focus, I would say, is publishing and business, but all contracts. Neither of us do litigation. We don't like going to court, so we don't do it.
What's the publishing mills, and why did you sell it, your company?
The Publishing Mills, right, thanks. That was a company that I founded in 1990. It was an audiobook company, although over the years we ended up doing one paperback. And we did about 200 audiobooks. I founded it, I guess, to have some autonomy in order to publish what I wanted to publish, and also in order to have the freedom to come and go as I wished. I had small children, very small then. And so, I don't know, I guess I just had the entrepreneurial bug. I had gone back to school after law school. I got an MBA from USC, the University of Southern California. And I think it was the very last semester I was there, I took a seminar in entrepreneurship. And until I took that seminar, I had thought, what would be great would be to work for a big company, like American Express, be a cog in the wheel. That's what I want to be. I want to be a cog. And then I took a seminar in entrepreneurship, and it was absolutely the opposite of anything I'd ever considered doing, and yet that's what I've ended up doing ever since.
So now, do you pitch authors to publishers? Do you help them to pitch their materials? What exactly the Big Happy Family, or just specialized in audiobooks?
Right, it's two different things. So with Big Happy Family is a distributor of audiobooks for digital distribution only. So if somebody has CDs or any other hard copy format of an audiobook, we don't work with that. We get audiobooks onto websites where they can be downloaded or streamed. So for instance, Audible, or there's a company called Overdrive that will distribute into libraries, places like that. That's what we do at Big Happy Family. And at K and Mills, that's where I will represent an author, and in that capacity, I will take their materials to publishers and try to find a good fit for the particular book and author.
So no traditional books, only audiobooks or digital ebooks as well, or just audio?
Yes, yes and no. With the law firm, we will work with traditional books, but we're not publishing them or distributing them. We're just trying to find a publisher for our clients in that capacity.
So like an agent, you're acting?
Kind of like an agent.
Okay.
In that capacity, I call myself a literary attorney. And for Big Happy Family, we actually did we did publish an ebook about a year ago, and I hope to do more of that. I think we will be doing more of that, along with the audiobooks. What's
the Overdrive that you said the company distribute to the bookshops? Like how they do that? Like CDs, or just how it works?
No. Overdrive distributes to libraries. I think they do also have other markets now, but so far as I'm aware, they just do digital downloads. So for instance, once in a while, I will go online to my local library, and I buy a lot of books, but I also take books out of the library, and sometimes I will download an ebook from the library, and that's been supplied to the library by Overdrive or a company like Overdrive. Similarly, You can take out an audiobook either by going to the library and getting the hard copy, or you can download it to your computer without even leaving your home. And it's Overdrive and companies along with Overdrive. There are others that do it as well, that supply those audiobooks to libraries.
So you download it for free, or it's a membership through the library, or how it works?
I think it depends on the library. At my library, there is no charge. There's no charge to belong to it. This is the Los Angeles County Library. But I understand that some library systems do have a small charge, perhaps, to download an ebook or an audiobook.
Can you brief us about the entertainment law?
Well, it's a pretty broad category. So we have a pretty broad spectrum of clients. And there are the producers, as I mentioned, that we represent, the ones who are trying to put together a project, be it for television or film, or these days, web series, pretty much anything you can think of, direct to DVD, all kinds of projects like that. We work with musicians sometimes. We work, as I mentioned, a lot with writers, and that's a big part of entertainment. Often, on my end, it's the book writers, but we also work with screenwriters sometimes. We don't like to submit. We're not the kind of attorneys who take a project around to different studios to see if anybody wants it. But if we have a client who comes to us and says, I have an offer and I need a lawyer to make sure my contract is right, that's where we step in with writers on screenplays.
What's the difference between copyrights and trademarks, intellectual property?
Intellectual property is essentially, I was going to say it's property you can't touch, but of course you can pick up a book or a DVD. But it's the content between those covers or on that disc that is the intellectual property. It is the expression of somebody's work. It's their writing, or it's their film, it's their music as it's been recorded, or as it's been written down, or otherwise created. A copyright protects what's called the expression. Let's see. I often have a client, this happened just last week actually, a client who came to me and said, I have an idea, but I don't want to tell anybody about it until I have a copyright in the idea. But I had to tell her, you cannot copyright an idea. You can only copyright what's called the expression of the idea. So if she were to write a book, or if she were to record an album, whether it's spoken word, music, otherwise, that can be protected. In fact, a copyright in the United States is protected. You have a copyright in your material as soon as you create it.
She cannot patent the idea?
And a patent is something else altogether. So a patent, there's actually a whole separate bar, you have to be admitted to the patent bar in order to be a patent attorney, because most patent attorneys are engineers. In order to obtain a patent, it's often quite complicated. And somebody such as myself would not necessarily understand, let's say I had pages and pages of code that somebody wanted to protect with a patent, or some sort of engineering idea. It wouldn't be something that I could comprehend. And so somebody who has an engineering background, most often I think you'll find patent attorneys have engineering backgrounds. So that's more along the line of protecting inventions, that sort of creation. But copyright protects your creative expression, your books, your your music, your film, that sort of thing. However, having said that you immediately have copyright in your creation. In order to have access to statutory protection, what the United States copyright law affords, you have to register that copyright. So you have your copyright, but in order to say somebody violates your copyright, infringes on it, if you want to bring an action and obtain damages, you need that registration.
But usually people just put the sign of copyrights and that's it, means that it's copyrighted. Or how people can register the copyrights and how much it costs, how long it takes.
Right, no. Well, that's kind of a myth. Putting that doesn't do anything really. Just to put a C on your unregistered copywritten material, it's copyrighted from the moment you create it. So you don't ever have to worry, do I have a copyright in my short story, in my film, yes, you do, but in order to have the strong action of the United States government so that you can sue somebody who infringes on your copyright, you need to register it with the United States Copyright Office. And the fees for that vary. It depends on what you're filing, what you're registering. It depends on whether you're doing it online or whether you're mailing it in. And you have to provide a copy of what you're registering. So, and how long it takes? Well, that's a good question too. I just had this conversation with some lawyers on a listserv that I'm on because I had filed a registration for a client for his music, for sound recently. And we got back the registration form very quickly. And I just recently filed, within the last month or so, a registration for a novel for a client, and it's not showing up yet as registered. It's not on the website. We haven't gotten anything. So I asked these other lawyers, well, what are you finding? How long is it taking you to obtain a copyright registration for a literary work? And the answers were all over the map. But one attorney said that on the copyright website, that it's saying it currently takes 8 months.
And
somebody else said they'd been waiting a year. So who knows? That's not
so
very
in
helpful,
simple
but
English, what's the difference between copyright and intellectual property?
copyright is to secure your ownership interest in a sense. It's to say that you are the one who has the right to do with the material as you wish. It's not for somebody else to do. Intellectual property is what you want that copyright to protect. The intellectual property is the creation itself, and the copyright is the protection of your rights in that creation.
How
And you asked about trademark too.
Trademark.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Trademark is to protect a term, a name, something that has come to represent a brand, essentially, in short. So that is something also we sometimes get people saying they want a trademark in their book. No, you don't get a trademark in your book. You can get a copyright. If you have a series, then you can perhaps trademark the name of the series. So Star Wars, for example, but not if there was one movie and it was called Star Wars, it would be difficult. Although once there were toys and all kinds of other derivative works, then you can establish there's a brand and you can get your trademark. So that is essentially to protect your overall umbrella. What's the word I'm looking for?
Of content or
Not
of creating.
Yeah, not the content itself, but the identification of the content, the name or the whatever's identified with it.
The brand, yeah, all the brand. So what was your involvement in the project that got the Grammys? And I wanted to ask you about that.
Okay. Well, when I had my own company, the Publishing Mills, we had 2 Grammy nominated titles. First one actually won, and that was for best, I don't know if they called it best, the comedy recording. And that was sort of an interesting situation. It was for a comedian called Jonathan Winters. He was very famous here. I don't know about where you are, but he had been around for decades and had never won a Grammy Award. And he and I had a friend in common. And this friend came to me with some recordings and said Jonathan had left voicemail messages on his answering machine, a lot of them, and they were in character, different characters. And he'd gotten written permission from Jonathan Winters to release them as an album. And so this gentleman had quite a bit of material. We went through it. We tried to make it better sound quality than what you would normally have from an answering machine. This was before voicemail. This was still an answering machine. We edited it to take out, some of the segments that we didn't think were very entertaining or to clean up the noises. We did what we could and released it as a comedy album because essentially that's what it was. These were little comedy skits that he had left on his friend's voicemail machine. And that's what the Comedy Grammy was awarded for. And then subsequently we did an audiobook that was the authorized biography of the Chieftains. They're an Irish music group. They have a loyal following the world over. And they've been around for decades too. They're very charming. And so I just had a feeling that because they were so loved in the music world, that would be a candidate for a Grammy Award. And it turned out that it was. We didn't win that one though. I forget who won that year.
Why it's hard for authors to publish directly to iTunes and Audible? That's why we have all these publishing companies specialized in audiobooks.
That's hard to answer because I don't work for iTunes or Audible, but I can just tell you from my perspective what Audible has done to make it easier. I don't know how many of your people who will watch this know about something called ACX. And
Yeah.
I know my understanding is it's not available worldwide, but I think they're trying to broaden. I think perhaps it's just become opened up to the UK, but don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. The idea of that is that if you are the owner of the intellectual property, if you have the rights to a particular book that is on Amazon, you can essentially claim it by going to ACX and putting in the name of the book and having the Amazon page come up and say, this is my property and I want to make an audiobook of it. And then then you can go ahead and either hire a narrator by paying them, or sometimes narrators will work for a share of earnings, future earnings, they'll take nothing in advance. And in that way, you can directly, as an author, get your material onto Audible, and Audible in turn will put that audiobook onto iTunes and Amazon.com as well as Audible.com. So that's one way.
Yeah, go ahead.
Other than that, it is hard, I think. If you don't have a book that's on Amazon.com, then I don't know if ACX is available to you. Maybe it is.
It's not. They are complicating it. Like they need an kind of a transcript copy or like a copy on Amazon in order to take it to ACX. And as you said, it's not available worldwide.
Yes. So I imagine that will change as quickly as they're able. I have no insight into the internal workings of ACX or Amazon or Audible, other than to know that they like to grow, and so it's my suspicion that they will grow it to other countries as they can. That I hadn't looked at the site in a while, so I wasn't sure if there was some way to put a book on that wasn't also on Amazon. So if that's not the case, if ACX is not available to an author, then what you can do is find a distribution company such as mine if you already have the audiobook produced. And if you don't already have the audiobook produced, then you need to I highly recommend you find a producer with experience in audiobook production rather than try to do it oneself, because I hear an awful lot of very badly produced audiobooks. And sometimes this is even the case when an author writes to me and says, I've used a very experienced producer, and so I know this sounds great. And then I'll hear it and I'll think that it doesn't, which is really too bad, because there is a standard. People who are buying audiobooks most of them have listened to quite a few of them. They know what an audiobook should sound like. And if they hear something that doesn't sound good, then they may give a negative review, which means you won't have many future sales. And so it's important to know that in a sense, your audiobook, any author's audiobook, is competing with every other audiobook out there. And it should sound as much as close to state of the art as possible. Well edited, sound wise, take out. I don't need to get into every bit about it, but like you shouldn't be able to hear pages turning. You shouldn't be able to hear people swallowing. You shouldn't be able to hear retakes. There is a standard, and whether by going to audiopub.org and looking at members of the Audio Publishers Association or just doing a little research, you can find producers of audiobooks. They'll work with people world over.
Through our communication, you always say that you are in the studio, so you help in the production sometimes of some audiobooks, or what you do in the studio?
I do, yes. So you're right. I am an attorney and I do have a big, happy family as well, but I also still produce and direct audiobooks myself. So I am often in the studio. You're right. And in fact, that's what I was doing when we were first speaking about a month ago, speaking by email. I was in the middle of an audiobook project then. So I am quite often in the studio. I still love it. It's
so you direct the narrator?
I don't narrate. I direct the narrator, yes. Right.
All right.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say the very good ones barely need a director. But it's still nice to have somebody there who's done the research, how to pronounce the words, or sometimes it's about the inflection. I think the sentence should have this emphasis, not that, whatever. It's fun. It's
now
great.
in the distribution, you just focus on the digital side, or also like CDs, you help in that?
No, I don't help on that. It's not something that we do. The thing about CDs is my feeling is, unless you are a public speaker, unless you're doing what we call back of the room sales, meaning, you've given a speech and now this room full of people wants to buy your audiobook. That's great. Then you should have CDs. But for most people, they're not doing that. People who want to listen to their audiobooks are going to the online sites to buy them. And so there are fewer and fewer places to sell CDs. And so we just don't distribute them. We don't work with them at all.
Is your focus fiction, non-fiction, or like both? Or?
Yeah, both, whatever. My criteria are it's pretty straightforward. It has to sound good. The person who brings it to us has to aver that they have the rights to it. And other than that, there's not too much that I comment on. I usually am, when I make comments to somebody who sent us something, it's usually about the sound quality. The content, the thing is, when Big Happy Family was small, I would listen to every audio program that was submitted to us from start to finish. But now we're distributing hundreds of titles and I can't do that anymore. So I just listen to a small sample. So I can't actually gauge the content. There's a clause in our contract that says, it's not disparaging of anybody, it's not libelous, it's not this, it's not that. A typical kind of, like you're not giving us something that's going to get us in trouble kind of clause.
What are the main platforms that you distribute to in terms of audiobooks?
Well, the main one, as of the date of this interview, is still Audible. They have a large customer base, and on top of that, they are owned by Amazon.com now and have been for some years. And in addition, they have a distribution deal with iTunes. So simply by getting your material into Audible's distribution network, you are also going to be finding your audiobook on Amazon and in iTunes. So they're the big entity. And then, as I mentioned, Overdrive, which is very useful for libraries. We work with a company called audiobooks.com, similar to Audible, where yes, it's a similar kind of concept. There's a company called Findaway, which has grown tremendously. They used to make, I think they still make, individual recorders that have one program on them. So you buy this, suppose you're in an airport and you want to listen to, let's just say, War and Peace. And so you buy War and Peace in the bookstore at the airport and you have this whole contained thing. You have the earphones, you have the recorder, and the book's already on it, the audiobook. But more than that, now they've become a distributor as well. So they also get things into different kinds of stores, and maybe into libraries, maybe into PXs. I'm not sure. They have a larger, they're distributing now to Scribd. That's a website as well that's growing. So we'll see. We'll see how, I'm open to all kinds of new distribution outlets as long as they seem to be grounded in some kind of fact and not fiction.
How about Spotify? Is it selling well audiobooks or only specialized in music mainly?
We have not worked with Spotify, so I actually can't attest to that. I have seen anecdotal emails about music on Spotify, people talking about how little they've earned from not just Spotify, from Pandora, from any sort of music site such as that, saying that their revenue is microscopic. But I don't know that from personal experience. I guess we'll see.
How long it takes usually to list these, let's say, content or audiobooks into these platforms?
That varies. Excuse me again. That varies depending on the place. So, and also depending on the urgency of the author's needs. So suppose somebody came to me and said, I have this audiobook, we've just finished recording it, but I needed to get on to Audible within the next 3 weeks because there's a major film coming out, and for some reason we were lucky enough to get the rights, not Simon & Schuster or Random House. Then I would tell my liaison at Audible, we have this audiobook, they need it up right away, there's a film coming, and Audible's really pretty good about making sure they get stuff up quickly if we need it. But we try not to abuse that. Most of the time we ask our authors or publishers, keep an eye on Audible, check it from time to time, see if your program's up. If it's not up within a month, tell me, and then I'll go back to them and say, to Audible, and say, we've been waiting, and can you tell me when to expect this? Normally it's up within that time, though.
Is the authors, like the licensors, can track their books, the sales? Is there a platform through your, let's say, or how it works? Like you sell, like you list it for them, and then you as a publisher or distributor have access to Audible to see the sales, and then you pay the author or licensor after 6 months or 3 months. How it works?
Right. We pay quarterly because we get reports quarterly. So this is actually a really interesting thing to me and a frustrating thing to our clients, which is that through ACX, I have been told that publishers who work through ACX can see day-to-day sales. They can see, maybe it's even up to the minute, that I'm not sure of. But if you work with Audible, not through ACX, which is how we work with Audible, ACX didn't even exist, right, directly with Audible, you do not have that option. You cannot see real-time sales. We have to wait. We are totally dependent on our quarterly reports. This is something too I hope will change, and I'm not sure why one is able to do that and the other side isn't, but that's how it is for now. So we get quarterly reports. We get them supposed to be within 60 days of the end of a quarter. Sometimes it's on time, sometimes it isn't. And until we have that, we cannot in turn report to our clients. So our contract says we will report within X number of weeks or days after we receive reports, because otherwise we'd be responsible for sending out reports that we didn't even have yet. So once we get that, and it's not only Audible, but theirs usually arrives last. We get pretty quickly emails from most of the other sites we work with. Overdrive we can go in and see anytime. I think that's the one exception.
Which one does better, like non-fiction or fiction in terms of sales on as audiobooks, and why?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that, although there probably is a statistical answer to that. But as far as Big Happy Family goes, it depends entirely on what the program is. So, for example, we have a client that has a recording of, she does all self-help audios, how to quit smoking, how to sleep, things like that. They do very well. People are really interested in that sort of program. And yet, if we have somebody who's done a memoir that might be very moving and very important, if people aren't searching for that particular thing, they may not find it, and it may not do as well. So even within a genre, within fiction or within nonfiction, you have ones that do very well and ones that don't. Same thing for fiction.
Do you optimize, like when you post the audiobooks on Audible, you write the description for the author, you suggest some things in terms of optimization, or it's provided by the author in general?
We don't. We have a form that they're sent, a metadata form, so they fill in the relevant information, the categories it belongs in, all that sort of info. I did have a publisher just a couple weeks ago send me an email to say she was very frustrated because when she searched by a particular keyword, her title was not coming up. And so I wrote to my liaison at Audible and I said exactly that. And she wrote back and said, we don't usually use keywords. We do by request only. And so we put in the request and they used it. And so now that will happen when somebody searches by that topic, her audiobook will pop up. But I didn't even know that. I didn't even realize that this was something that we had to request. I hadn't thought about it at all. Nobody had ever asked me.
How the fee structure works, like with the authors as a distributor?
Big Happy Family only has one model. It's a 50-50 revenue share. We don't have charges. We don't ask for any money up front to put you in our listings or to take your materials and send them out. But once the revenue starts being earned, then we share it exactly evenly. And sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's not, all the way around. Sometimes for us it's not so good. Sometimes for the publisher, they wish they had a bigger share. Sometimes we wish we had a bigger share. There are audiobooks that literally earn pennies. So it's sort of the great evener. We just have that one model. It may change over time, but for the time being, that's what it is.
Like how many?
I should add one thing. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add one thing. Even though I said we don't have any charges, there is one charge, and that is when we pay publishers who are not within the United States. There's usually a surcharge that we have to pay in order to send that payment, and so that charge we do pass along to the client.
How many books, like audiobooks, is it bad, good, and very good in terms of sales? Like, if you can give us numbers from your experience, like how many books should be sold within, let's say, the first month or the first year? And is it like, it's still selling because people searching for these keywords on Audible, or like usually just when you post it for the first year or two and then it will dry out?
I don't really have an answer to that either. I think odds are that if you have a book that is in the news or tied into some major event, you will sell more when that is happening. But aside from that, then your sales will dwindle unless it's something that's constantly in the news. So, or if you have a bestseller that sells every year, something like The Great Gatsby, where people want to read it every year. And probably there was a blip when the film came out. It probably did a little bit better. But most audiobooks, I don't have a rule of thumb.
How the exclusive rights works, like when you take the book and distribute it, like the author can still distribute it to other platforms if you don't have it, or how it works? And for how long is your contract?
Okay. Our standard contract is 5 years. We do ask for exclusive download rights, except for if the author or publisher is selling from their own site. We always grant that right, of course. And if we have somebody who comes to us and says, I want to put this on such and such site and you're not selling there, may I? Then usually we will say yes, unless we're in the process of setting up with that venue. So I think we're pretty easygoing as far as distribution goes. We don't like to stomp on anybody's rights. We want our publishers to sell as many copies as they can.
What's the struggles that you see the authors that want to start or transform the copy, the traditional book that they have into audiobook that they go through?
I think it will be what I was alluding to earlier, which is not knowing who to hire to make that transition. And maybe part of that is also thinking that they should be the narrator. So most authors should not be the narrator. There are some authors who are amazingly good at narrating. I mean, Neil Gaiman immediately comes to mind. He's so incredible at reading his own work. And also, I think for nonfiction, if you're an expert in your field, then that's a good idea to narrate your own audiobook because, well, for one thing, another narrator might mangle all the words that are specific to your area of expertise, but also because you bring a certain gravitas to it. You're the expert, you know what you're talking about. But most authors, they can read a bedtime story to their kid or something, but it doesn't mean that they're going to hold the interest of the listener. And that's really what you're trying to accomplish. It's not because you're not nice enough or your voice isn't. It's just the ability to tell a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, in a way that will keep the listener listening and hopefully recommending your audiobook.
If I have a series of content, let's say interviews or different things, you usually take the rights for one by one or all the series when you sign?
Our contract actually is not specific like that. Our contract is essentially for whatever it is that you have that you want us to distribute. As long as it meets the criteria that we talked about, as long as it has good sound quality and that you have the rights to it and that it doesn't infringe on anybody else's rights. We don't require that you give us all of your materials, but you are welcome to.
What's the other projects that you're currently working on for the future?
Well, let's see. I start directing an audiobook tomorrow that's called House of Echoes by Brendan Duffy, and it's a creepy kind of thriller. I don't think he'd mind my saying that. I hope not. So that should be kind of fun. And then I just recently directed an audiobook recording of a classic, Thomas Hardy's Far From the Madding Crowd. And that, I believe, is being re-recorded because there's a film coming out. So that goes back to what we were talking about, how you make something relevant again, how you tie into the potential for sales. And that's, by the way, can I segue into a marketing moment here? If you have, the thing about audiobooks is the budget is usually non-existent to tiny. So to try to market it is a big challenge. A little easier nowadays because of the internet and and all the listservs that talk about different genres of books and all that sort of things. But if you have an event or something in the media that you can tie into, then that's great. We call it piggybacking. So if you can piggyback into the publicity for something else, then you have a shot at increasing the sales of your book.
What's the most famous titles that you distributed?
We are distributing a recording of The Great Gatsby. We're distributing a recording of several recordings of different books of the Bible, and that is something that sells perennially. So do well-known children's stories, public domain children's stories. Those do pretty well. The Mark Twain's stories are not all for children, but all the classic fairy tales, that sort of thing, they do pretty well. Because there's always a new audience. There's always new children ready to hear for the first time. Imagine if you've never heard Hansel and Gretel.
It's like when you publish or distribute to Audible, you need a code for the book, or how it works?
You don't need one. No, you don't. They, I think, will assign one. I don't know if they still do that. In the beginning, when we first started working with them some years ago, they talked about doing that. But if you're talking about a book identification code, an ISBN code, then if the publisher wants a code for their book, they should secure their own code, because it does allow you to move your book from distributor to distributor. Otherwise, if it's identified with a distributor's code, then once you move to another distributor, that code won't work for you anymore.
So you suggest, like, advise the authors to make their own code and then give it to the distributor to use it for the audiobooks, or no?
Yes and no. Usually we don't tell our clients that they need to even bother to get one, because for digital audiobooks, it's less important than it is for hard copy, for CDs and the like. But if somebody does wish to do that, if they do wish to get their own code, then yes, we tell them they should do it themselves instead of relying on. It's expensive, and that's why publishers don't like to do it. It can be expensive, I should say. But if you buy enough of them at a time, then it's less expensive. And if you're planning to do more than one, then you have all these extra codes for when you're ready to use them.
You mentioned that your contract is for 5 years. What happens in case the author wanted to cancel? How often?
We've never said no.
How long it takes you to remove the content, and what usually happens?
Mm-hmm. When I get an email from an author or a publisher who wants to cancel, then we usually say yes, even if the 5 years are not up, because, it's like dating someone who doesn't want to be with you. Why would you do that? And then we give notice to the sites that we work with to say, we're no longer working with this publisher. Could you please take this title down? Then it's out of our hands. We don't have the ability to go in and remove it ourselves, so we just have to rely on them. So usually they're pretty good about it. Once in a while, we'll get an email from the publisher saying, this is still up. Or once in a while, I'll get an accounting statement and I'll see a title on there that we're being paid for that we don't distribute anymore. So then I know they didn't take it down, and then I have to go back to whomever it is, whichever website, and say, please, this isn't ours anymore.
How many people working with you now, like online or offline, or like?
We're small. There's me. There's George Hodgkins. So I'm the person who does the contracts. It's my company. I started it in 2006. And then George thankfully came along, and he is the publisher liaison, so that whenever there's anything technical, I call him my tech guy. I don't know if he knows I call him my tech guy. So all the electronic media goes to George. The metadata form, he takes care of it. He speaks metadata. I don't. Whenever there's a glitch with a website, either he'll tell me about it and I'll go to the site and say, we're having problems with this. Can you fix it? Or he'll fix it if it's something we can fix ourselves. And then we have somebody who helps us do our accounting statements, because it's so time consuming, and it's essentially a manual compilation of all these different reports we get. So it was taking me too long. So we now work with somebody who helps us to do that.
How is your daily work and life routine look like?
Well, if I'm in the studio, I usually have to, my daily routine is I get up, I do an hour of exercise usually, and then I take my dog for a walk. And then I go off to the studio. If it's a studio day, then usually when I come home, I have some other emails to take care of, or some legal work, contracts, or otherwise contact with my clients. And then of course I also have to check my Big Happy Family emails and get in touch with the people who have inquiries or questions. And then if I'm not in the studio, usually I will work at home for the first few hours of the day, and then I'll go into my office, and there I can talk to my law partner, and we can, work on things that we work on things together, and we also work on things separately. So it depends on what projects we have going at any given time.
How much you charge for like if you take over the production of the audiobook per hour, or how it works?
To produce it, yeah, the answer to that is it depends. It depends on the project, but typically nowadays, most people are looking at a cost per finished hour. And so what I usually ask is how many words are in the project, and by word count we can come up with an estimate of what we think the finished hour will be, and then we're able to give a quote. But my quote isn't the same for everybody, because sometimes I have an editor working with me that costs less than might have an editor who costs more for any particular project, and depends on the studio. If we're working in I have a home studio. If we're working there, then it's less expensive than if we have to use a fancier studio elsewhere.
So each 10,000 words is about like 1 hour?
9,000.
9,000.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's your other hobbies?
Well, I guess you won't be surprised to know I read a lot.
You read or you listen?
I read. Well, and I listen. I do. I live in Los Angeles, so I'm in my car a lot. So I do. I listen. But I read constantly reading. My other hobbies, I travel. I love to travel. And I spend a lot of time with my family and my friends.
What are the must-have or must-use softwares that you use all the time that makes you more efficient?
That's a good question. Well, the first one I thought of is Word, because I work with contracts so much, so I have to have Word. And of course I have to have the internet. So, but other than that, for recording, I have Pro Tools. And I'm just sneaking a peek at my phone to see what else I use.
For phone, I want the top three apps that you use on your phone.
Okay, so I'm going to say my number one app. Well, my number one app is actually my mail. But my number two app is probably Viber, so that I can talk to people in other countries. It's very easy that way, or when I travel, as long as I have Wi-Fi at hand. And then my third app is probably the map. So if I'm going somewhere I don't know how to get to. Not too exciting.
Top three mentors.
Okay. First and foremost, my father, who was, he was really smart, he was really eloquent, but he was a really kind person, and he loved people. He just was he was like the Uber dad. Like, everybody was his kid as far as he was concerned. If he could do something to help somebody, he would do something to help somebody. And he loved mankind. He also loved the law. So everything I think I learned about respect for other people started with him. And then my mother. My parents, I grew up outside of New York City, which is important because my parents took us to see Broadway shows a lot when I was a kid. And so that instilled in me a love of theater, which, by the way, I left that out. That is also one of my hobbies. I go to a lot of theater. I'm even on the board of a local theater. And theater and music and literature are all intertwined. And so I would have to say those are my top two mentors. And my third mentor. That's harder, but I think maybe I'm going to give this one to Nick Benet, who's the producer that I told you about, who was saying, keep your eyes open, kids, because here comes spoken word. And he was so right.
What's the most important factors for success in 3 words?
Determination, education, and I don't know if I can think of one word for bouncing back. By education, by the way, I don't necessarily mean going to school. I mean, you have to immerse yourself in whatever genre, whatever endeavor you're undertaking. And then you have to be able to, you're going to get hit, you're going to fall down, and you need to get back up. Perseverance. There you go. There's the word.
What's the biggest failure moment in your life, and what did you learn from it?
Yes. Okay. I thought about this one. From a professional standpoint, I think the biggest failure in my life was I should have sold the publishing mills much earlier than I did. And what I learned from it, there's a saying that I don't know if I invented, but I use from time to time, which is, you've all heard the saying, opportunity knocks. So when opportunity knocks, open the door. And opportunity knocked a lot while I had my company, and I didn't open the door. I thought that opportunity would knock louder. And I also think I was a little short-sighted in that I was so wrapped up in my sense of identity with being the publisher of that company that I couldn't.
So what's the difference between that one and Big Happy Family?
That one was a publishing company. We actually would license rights and make audiobooks. I would license rights. I would cast them. I would direct them. I had to deal with distributors to get them into the marketplace. Big Happy Family is only a distributor. We don't manufacture. We don't produce. I do produce audiobooks, but not through Big Happy Family. I'm just.
And what's the bigger opportunities that knocked that you think it's bigger than that company?
Well, the opportunities that knocked were several times during the course of owning that company. I received offers to sell it, and I did not take those offers. And then when I did get rid of the company, it's because I wanted to move on, and it wasn't the optimum time, to say the least. So I think, I held on to it for too long, thinking there'll be a better deal. I want a better deal, and so a better deal will come. And that's not what happened. And I wasn't thinking about. I was thinking that was. Have you heard the expression "reaching for the brass ring"?
No.
Okay, so basically that means you want to have something great. It's like when your ship comes in, something wonderful is going to happen, and then you're set. But by selling a company that was the size of my publishing company, I still would have had to go on and do something else, and I hadn't really contemplated what the something else would be. I was so wrapped up in that one business. And I think the important thing for business people to learn today, unless they are in a business that they want to be in forever, is to realize that there will be life after this initial business. You're going to have another business, or you're not, but life is not going to start and end because you are with this one company. So that was, I think, the biggest lesson was to learn that everything is temporary and take opportunities when they come.
What are the habits that you're trying to develop to stay efficient?
Yeah, this is interesting too, because I've been talking to people about this very issue recently. It turns out there are a lot of people like me who you have a list of things, whether it's a real list or an email list or just in your head list of things you need to do. People are depending on you to do them. You want to get them off your desk, and yet, even though you know that you need to do them and people want you to do them, you're not doing them. Why? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't had anybody tell me. Why is there this list of things that we all procrastinate to do, and yet we'd be so much happier if we just did them and got them off of our to-do list. So I've been working on just doing the things that I don't want to have on my to-do list anymore. That it's time, it's past time. So I'd like to just learn to just take things as they come. Just do them when they come in. Just do things on time. Do them, get rid of them.
How do you change your mood when you're depressed? What do you do?
I'm happy to say that I don't get depressed very often, but I did the other day. I was kind of feeling blue and stressed, and of all things, I decided to eat a banana. There's a lot of potassium in bananas, and they're really good for you, and they can be mood changing, and actually it helped me a lot. My stress was lifted. So I would say first and foremost, make sure that your diet is balanced and that you're getting all the potassium and magnesium and other nutrients that you need. And I think that actually is applicable to a lot of people. And I think also by getting rid of those things on my list, that was what I was stressed about.
Or walking the dog.
Yeah, that does help.
What's the best advice that you have ever received?
Right when I got out of law school, I was in the Los Angeles County Law Library, and this happened to me twice. I was doing some research for a friend, and two different older men came up to me at two different times and said, "Oh, you're new. Specialize. Whatever you do, you should specialize." And that was really interesting advice that I ignored, because I thought that the most fun thing to do as a lawyer would be to be a general practitioner, so that you're not doing the same thing every day, because it would be more interesting to have lots of different things come your way. But in fact, as I got older, I found that those gentlemen were both right, because for me anyway, the focus that comes with specializing allows you to understand the nuance, the detail of a particular area, whether it's in law or any other business. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Specialize.
If you have the chance to advise your younger self, what would you advise your younger self?
This is besides sell the company to one of those earlier offers. I think that I would have to tell myself to learn how to relax more. And it's not the same as taking time off. It's actually learning how to deal with stress. Because my young working life was very stressful. So if I could go back and teach myself that, I think that would have been...
That's very interesting. Like 90% of the people of the interviews that I asked this question, they answer the same answer, which is slow down, relax, learn to... Because we're always in rush when we are younger, and then we realize that it doesn't worth it.
Right, exactly. And everything that seems so big, there are some things that are so big, but by and large, the things that we focus on in any moment turn out to just be, they're little blips in time. Even when it comes to raising kids, all the things that are so upsetting. Oh, Johnny got a D on his paper. I don't have a kid named Johnny, by the way. I'm just making that up. But sure, help your kid. But it's not worth tearing your hair out unless this is a chronic problem kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like all these little bumps in the road. They are little. They're just little bumps in the road.
What's your favorite quote?
My favorite what? Oh, quote? I don't know if I have one. When I was in high school, we had the opportunity to put a quote underneath our senior picture, and I put "Ignorance is bliss." And I think a lot of people think that ignorance is not bliss, but I kind of think that even after all this time, I kind of think in some context it is.
Which is right.
Sometimes.
Top 3 favorite books.
My very favorite book, and has been since high school, is "The Heart is a Lonely Hunter" by Carson McCullers. Incredible novel, interweaving relationships in a small town. I read it again recently, and it holds up. She was, I think, 23 years old when she wrote it. It's incredible. I'm not sure I have 2 other favorite books. I'm sorry. I love so many books.
You don't read any nonfiction or just novels?
I do. Actually, I do want to mention one other, but this one's fiction, that I read recently, and I loved it so much that I've now been reading everything that this gentleman writes. It's a book called The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and I guess it was a huge bestseller some years back, but I didn't hear about it until a couple months ago when a friend told me about it, and it's just enchanting and really well written and captivating, and so I really recommend that. Nonfiction, what's my favorite nonfiction book? I've read so many that are so important. I guess just as a genre, the ones that I like are where people actually have the ability to focus on a subject and then expose it to us so that we can appreciate what other people have experienced or are still experiencing. And usually those are, sad books, but sometimes there are lessons we can learn or ways to help.
Top 3 people that you're inspired by.
Wow. Is that on my list? Not 3 people I'm inspired by. Well, I know this is redundant, but I will go back to my parents, because not only did they set an amazing example for all of us, and I come from a big family, but they stayed really good people in doing it, and they taught us more or less how to have a compass that points true north. Some of us, it stays there. Some of us, it wobbles a little. But, there are big lessons there for everybody. And I guess that's is because it's 2015 and there's still so much animosity among people. This is a hard one, but I guess, I mean, I could say Barack Obama, but I'm sort of leaning toward Martin Luther King, because if you put yourself at risk to say things people don't want to hear you say, but there are things people need to hear, that's pretty incredible.
What
I could have said Winston Churchill too. I mean, you know, there are just people who
great leaders.
really were put it on the line. Yeah.
What makes you really happy?
Family and friends, good books. I love coffee. I love good coffee. Beautiful days, travel, helping people. I like that I'm able to do that in my law firm. Also with Big Happy Family, but more so I think with the law firm. My dog, love him.
Last question, how people can contact you?
My email address is Jessica K at bighappyfamilyaudio.com, or actually the email I check the most often is my AOL address, which is JESSIKAYE at AOL.com.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for your time and this valuable information. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, everyone. Be efficient and stay efficient, and see you soon with another leading expert.